is that even with the movies and the celebrities, the core of Comic-Con is still comics, and that includes graphic novels, longer narratives in one book, unlike sort of serialized comic books. In 1967, civil rights icon Julian Bond put his opposition to the Vietnam War in comic book form, with illustrations by T.G. Lewis. The 9/11 Committee report was also given its own graphic adaptation in 2006. And who could forget Moss, Art Spiegelman's Pulitzer Prize-winning depiction of the horrors of the Holocaust. Late great civil rights hero John Lewis understood the power of the graphic novel very well. He co-authored the March trilogy about his experiences during the civil rights movement. And the sequel to the series is Run. Its first volume just finished as Lewis died in 2020. Lewis himself attended several Comic-Cons to promote his graphic novels, leading children on a children's march in 2015. Lewis attended his final Comic-Con in 2017. This weekend, I attended a panel featuring Lewis's grandson, John Miles Lewis, and a children's march with voter registration was held in Lewis's honor at the end. For more, I'm joined by Andrew Aden, a former advisor to the late Congressman John Lewis and co-author of Lewis' last graphic novel, Run, Book One, as well as the March trilogy. Arthur, thank you so much for joining me this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason. It's good to be with you.
So I just want to point out, because I was at the panel, I thought it was fantastic, I thought it was moving. Just tell us a little bit about why John Lewis, who at one point actually cosplayed as himself at a convention, why did John Lewis want his story told as a graphic novel? There will be movies about him, there will be documentaries, there are specials, but why did he want this particular art form to express his story as well?
Well, first, comics and graphic novels have a long history in the civil rights movement. As you mentioned, Julian Bond's Vietnam comic from 1967. The Lowndes County Freedom Organization produced comics in 1966. Martin Luther King Jr. himself edited a comic book in 1957 called Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story. But more than anything, comic books are the future. Sequential narrative is the language of this generation because they grew up on the internet. And if you want to reach them, you have to do it in their language. And the beauty of comics and graphic novels, too, is that there is no age limit. As a congressman would say, anyone from 8 to 80, or young people, or people who are not so young, we can all read them. And we digest this information so much more efficiently and so much more quickly that it allows us to reach the broadest possible audience.
So, Andrew, this is one of the things that I found really interesting also when I was sitting there and watching the panel and having gone through March and currently going through Run, is that you see that it is sharing history in ways that your regular textbooks don't reach. We're now at a time in our country, and even particularly in Georgia, where you have Republicans and white nationalists pushing against this fake critical race theory. They're pushing, passing state laws against divisive concepts. John Lewis is a national hero. He is a Georgia hero. Do you think that it will be possible to get March and Run into schools in Georgia right now, given that they've passed laws against critical race theory? Would this be considered critical race theory if you tried to explain it or give it to Brian Campus and me can read it?
I mean, Brian Kemp's going to make up whatever definition he wants of critical race theory, but this is about teaching the truth and teaching history. And March is one of the most widely taught graphic novels in America, and Run is finding its place. People forget that before we produced March, there was something called the nine-word problem. It was a term coined by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And it said essentially that the vast majority of students were graduating from high school only knowing 9 words about the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream, and that's it. But in a single decade, March was able to fix that problem. And now we have the civil rights movement taught not just in history class and not just in social studies class, but in English classes and literature classes. Because as March Book 3 was the first graphic novel to win the National Book Award, and it won more literary awards from the American Library Association than any other book in its history. And now Run winning the Eisner Award on Friday night, it's continuing this tradition. And I think part of the reason that they have made up all of these problems, whether it's critical race theory or whatever they want to call it in education, is because these books are working. They're reaching students. I remember talking to Congressman Lewis after he saw the Black Lives Matter lettering painted in front of the White House. And he said, it looks just like the cover of March Book 3. And then as he watched these students protest and rise up in response to the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, he called them the March Generation. For a decade now, we've been teaching the civil rights movement in schools through comic books, and it's been working. But I think that is the reason why you see so much being made now about how we teach this, how we teach history in our classrooms.
And you know, I got to point out to the audience, in case you think that this is still sort of about funny books, the most banned book in America last year was Maeba Koabe's Gender Queer. So clearly comic books are having an impact. That's why the right is after them. Andrew, I thank you so much for joining me this evening.